Since the birth of Tredegar at the end of the 18th century, it was here in what was to become the Circle that the townspeople fought, traded, rebelled and celebrated. As time went by, all the important buildings in the town coalesced around the Circle. The town hall, a courthouse, lockup and school. The busy shops where daily supplies and luxuries were haggled over, the marketplace of Tredegar. The many pubs where workers drank, sung and fought. But it is what happened in an office above one of the smallest shops in the Circle that was to have a massive impact on the whole of Great Britain. Our story looks at the important role the Circle played in the development of this iron town. Today, the Circle seems to have lost some of its vibrancy, but changes and developments point to an optimistic future.
Tredegar has Sam Humphrey Sr., the ironmaster, to thank for the Circle and the wide streets running out from it. Humphrey had an ironworks at Penydarren in Merthyr, and he was very concerned, it appears, about the state of those streets and the narrowness and the dirt and the fumes, that he decided that his new town, the town he created, would have wide streets running out from a central place. And this central place, at first the square, as the buildings developed around it, became the Circle. And streets ran out in 4 directions from it. It's one of the finest examples of a planned town in the United Kingdom. And we have, as I said before, Sam Humphrey, the ironmaster, to thank for that. How many of us ever think about Humphrey now?
Daily life in the Circle could be rough, boisterous and busy. There were 4 pubs around the Circle: the Cambrian, the Tredegar Arms and the demolished Black Prince and Freemasons Arms, and workers were often paid in the pubs. Samuel Humphrey, talking about his workers, reported to Parliament in 1846. Since wages rose again, their habits of drunkenness have become as great as ever. There are now 3 assault cases for 1 when wages were lower, and they could not indulge in their habits of intemperance.
I remember the Black Prince. It was much worse than the Calm. It was dark and dingy and a terrible smell of stale eggs in there. I remember one afternoon when there was an argument over cards, someone was caught cheating and he had his hands stapled to the table with a knife. It was a very bad place to be in those days.
The magistrates in the town hall were kept busy dealing with numerous cases of drunkenness and violence. In 1875, the Western Mail reported the death of William Miller in a drunken brawl at the Greyhound pub on Iron Street.
The town clock itself stands where once the town stocks was sited, right in the middle of what became the Circle. And there are actual records of people being put in those stocks quite late in the century, punished for some petty misdemeanor and put out there with their legs trapped and kept there in all sorts of weathers and conditions. And indeed, and in circumstances where people going by could throw anything at them if they wished.
In 1858, local newspapers reported that Michael Cronin, a drunk from Ebervale, was sentenced to be confined to the stocks in the Circle for 6 hours in the pouring rain. With many young single men seeking work in the town, prostitution was rife. In earlier days, the Circle had a reputation as a red light district. In the 1851 census, the Tredegar Arms had a complement of 4 young female workers and a landlady, who came from all corners of the county. We can only speculate if they added to their income. A few decades later, it is thought that the steps surrounding the clock were removed as they were a regular pick-up point for ladies of the night. By 1858, the iconic town clock was in place. Mrs. R.P. Davis, the ironmaster's wife, raised money with a bazaar in Bedwethley House, matched by a donation from her husband to build the clock. The ironworkers would now have no excuse for lateness.
The town clock itself, most people will not realise, of course, that that was a monument to the Duke of Wellington. And strangely enough, it was the wars fought by the Duke of Wellington that really inspired the creation of this town. There was so much need for iron caused by the Industrial Revolution and by the wars.
The Circle also became an important shopping centre.
In the Circle here, before the clock was erected in 1858, this was a sort of a market area where the tradespeople used to come in and set up their stalls and sort of sell their wares. This was before 1858, before the clock.
There were shops here. It was one shop, one of the most important grocer shops in the area was Price the Circle Stradiga. Again, very, very near this place. And this was one of the few places where you could actually buy wine in the Heads of the Valleys region at a time when, of course, wine was a very, very posh thing to drink.
Horse and carts loaded with goods clattered around the Circle. Cattle were unloaded from the station at the bottom of Morgan Street to be driven to the slaughterhouse behind the Olympic Cinema, which is now the popular Wetherspoons public house. Almost anything could be bought in the Circle. Meat from Woodward, pots and pans from Charles and Finch's, groceries and drinks from Price's stores, medicines from Black's the chemist.
As time went on, of course, you had the town hall. Just across the way is now Wetherspoons, and that was is in the actual Tredegar Market Hall. And by the way, there's a connection there because the girders in Tredegar Market Hall were laid by Daniel Gooch, who became the great engineer and locomotive superintendent for Brunel's Great Western Railway. And by the way, a man who laid the first ever transatlantic suboceanic telegraph cables.
The market hall was so popular that the stalls spilled out into the road. One of the roads they spread into is still called Market Street. As the shopping centre for the town, the businesses developed and changed over time.
Just behind me here, the Little Gems, which was in the past was a butcher shop in the early part of the last century. Also, it was Sutton's grocery store.
Cafes. There was 2 cafes around the Circle, sweet shops. So that made us want to be around here. Also, it was the stop that you got off when we got to town. And attended the Saturday morning pictures, etc.
You've got the Circle Cafe, which was owned by Italians from the 1920s up until the 70s or 80s.
I can remember the Circle being very busy, where all the buses used to park around here, the Stevens buses, the blue buses, the red and white, and Charlie Hill's buses.
On the corner next to the Cambrian, you had Crosswoods, which was a grocery shop, and that was there up until the 60s and 70s.
I used to deliver the papers to the local pubs around here, like the Cambrian, which is a pub where the workers used to go, the miners and people from the quarries, and it was a real rough pub with the strong ciders in there. I can remember the sawdust on the floor and the spittoons each side. It was a very bad place to be in those days, especially for a young man.
And then we come across then to the Freemasons' Arms, which was a public house way back in the early part of the last century. Then next door to that you had Price's Stores, which is a very old grocery stores, which was in the town from the 1890s or 1880s onwards.
When I was young, I used to work for Doris Ayres in Bridge Street, and I used to deliver goods for Price the Circle. It was a very nice shop to go into, very friendly. All the shelves were full of goods, and people used to come in and talk, and there used to be a lady in a uniform patching butter into shape behind the counter. It was a very, very nice shop.
In Corals, which is to my right, there used to be a big grocer's shop, and then later it became a electric shop, and after that it was a hairdresser's.
Mr. Price, who owned the Price's shop in the Circle, he was a magistrate, and apparently his house was broken into, and his wife's clothes were ripped to pieces. It was over something which he had put someone into prison, And some woman had spotted the people and recognised them and got the police, and I believe they went to prison after that.
Then we come around then to number 10, which was Armston's, which was pianos and organs they sold there. We're going back to the last century.
Where the Made in Tredegar studios are was the medical aid for Tredegar, where Nye Bevan had his ideas for the national health.
You've got the town hall, which the council used to use, and on the one corner here was Spencer's the solicitors. They were very big solicitors in the town at the time. So, as I say, the town hall, it was rebuilt in 1892, and as it is today, it was used by the council and for all public meetings and everything.
Because that was a big part of the circle many years ago, where people would stand on the veranda there and make speeches, like Nye Bevan.
Then we come next door to that, which was the first Tredegar Cooperative Society shop, which was opened in 1901. And then later on, next door to that, was the red and white offices.
Now, over where I work at the youth cafe, there was a big ironmonger's there. The 3 stories was Charles and Finch's.
Which was a very old ironmonger's business. And with Charles and Finch, every building material that came into town had to go through him first. So he took a percentage of what was being delivered, like sand and cement and everything, to the builders. Then next door to that, then we come to the Tredegar Arms, which was built in 1807, quite a few years ago. There was an electrical contractor who was doing the job there, and he was cutting out the wall there, and he found an old musket. It was taken out of the wall. It was sent away to St. Fagans to be authenticated about a date, and it was around about the 1838-39. And we've got it at the moment in the local museum in the library, and it was the story goes, whether it's true or not, that it might have been that when the Chartists were retreating from Newport, they were hiding their weapons wherever they could to get away from the authorities. Next down to the Tredegar Arms and Black's the Chemist, you've got Bridge Street, which goes down to Georgetown. That was the main shopping area in the town before the shops were erected in the main town. The Jewish population had a load of shops down there. The tinsmiths were down there making their cans and what do you call for the miners. And that was quite a busy area, Bridge Street. That was the main shopping area in the 1820s. Opposite that again was the Punch House. The Punch House was a very old pub, and behind the Punch House was the old slaughterhouse. And all the slaughtermen used to use the Punch House for their break and when they drinking their beer after being slaughtering all day. Then you come up then to where the Witherspoons is now, which was the old market hall.
And also you see many queues on picture nights, which was most days of the week. You'd see a big queue coming round from the Olympia, which is just off the circle, going all the way up Market Street. The businesses today are a lot different, whereas mostly a lot of food shops in the circle and through town. And now there's babies' clothes shops, there's betting offices, there's a library being put where the old Black Prince was many years ago on the corner there.
But the circle wasn't only the social and economic hub of Tredegar, it was the heart of Tredegar's political life.
Historically, of course, the circle became the centre of town life, social life as well. When you think that down through this very street marched Tredegar Chartists on their way to Newport in 1839, you think that just across the road in the town hall on that balcony, Bevan's various elections to Parliament were announced. When you think too that this was a centre of activity, of excitement. The Jewish riots of 1911 broke out but a few yards from where we now are.
Tredegar has a long history of social unrest, with the Riot Act having to be read many times to hopefully calm the population. From the Chartists marching through the circle on their way to Newport, serious election rioting in the 19th century, and violent anti-Irish and anti-Jewish riots in later years. However, the circle also saw many celebrations.
And the Sunday school walks on Whit Monday that went down through this town, right down to the park. Of course, on the few occasions when the park was allowed, it was open to the public. Sunday schools walked down through the town, marched through the circle and down to Bidwelty House and Park, and then back up again. It's a wonderful local celebration. During the First World War, of course, there was actually a tank mounted in the circle, and this tank was to raise money for the war effort. And the whole place was exciting and vibrant and different and wonderful. It was the centre of life of most Tredegar people in the years gone by. How very much I'd like to see that happen again.
In the late 19th and early 20th century, Tredegar was a bustling and busy town, as this early footage shows. The town gathered around the clock to celebrate the coming end of war on VE Day, 1945. New Year's Eve and Christmas were celebrated around the brightly decorated clock. Perhaps the most important event that happened in the circle are more hidden. In this building, 10 The Circle, the ideas that led to the creation of the NHS were being formed in the first floor committee room of the Tredegar Working Men's Medical Aid Society. Through the work of this society, Tredegar had its own local NHS, developed by the energetic Social Secretary Walter Conway. This was the blueprint Nye Bevan used to expand healthcare throughout the UK. Rowley Morgan was the last chairman of the Tredegar Medical Aid Society.
Well, the Medical Aid Society was founded in 1890, but it went back to about 1830 with smaller little clubs running something similar, but it all converged in about 1890. They charged a few coppers in the pound, and at one stage they were running 5 doctors, 2 dentists, 2 surgeries, nurses, so all for a couple of coppers. But it really started when we had a brilliant man take over as secretary in about 1920. Walter Conway his name was, and he served with Mr. Nye Bevan, who went on to formulate the National Health Service.
It's wonderful to be able to celebrate the importance of 10 The Circle and its influence really in the creation of the National Health Service. The need for medical aid and health in the 1930s really led to that. And although Bevan took the idea forward, it was the development of medical services in places like this that created the health service we have today.
Anyway, I started work in 57, and the first thing my father said to me when I had my pay was, get down and sign on. So this is where I met Mrs. Childs, who was the secretary then. She frightened me to death. So I signed on, and what you had to do, if you needed glasses or teeth or anything like that, you would go, you'd pay for them, and you'd have a receipt, and you'd fetch their receipt back to Mrs. Childs, and she would give you the appropriate amount, which was fixed by the committee. They were in conflict all the time, mind you, with the coal owners down here who owned the mines, because the miners then, as you know, would have a fall on them, they'd break their leg or something, and there was no compensation or anything. They would just, if you died, they'd give you an orange box to put your body in.
Nye Bevan created a national health service which is free at the point of need. It was free at the point of need, and it actually came out of Tredegar. The model came out of Tredegar, and it's been taken up in various parts of the world, but it had never been tried anywhere else in the world. It is literally made in Tredegar. It's fantastic, and for me, it's a priceless asset, one of the best things that has ever come out of politics in Britain.
And it's interesting to see that in virtually every national poll that's held about what is created by politics, what are the good things, the health service comes out top almost every single time. But I think we should never forget that those that drove the idea forward were ordinary working class people. And it was made out of need.
Yeah.
It was the need to create health services because they couldn't afford it. And in some respects, we're in those positions today.
My father was on the hospital board at the same time as now Bevan, and they had a meeting, and they told Bevan to get out, or Mr. Bevan to get out. But he caused quite a lot of trouble, and he agitated everybody up until he had the National Health Service started in 1948. And that was a wonderful thing, that was. It was really wonderful. So we from a small beginning, we've done well here.
The history of this building is second to none. It's part of the jewel in the crown, I think, of British politics, of British social life, because we often think of the industrial area that we live in as coal and steel. But really, alongside coal and steel, the creation of the health service was undoubtedly one of the greatest political moves the world has ever seen, and it's been an influence across the world.
I honestly think that the people of Tredegar and the surrounding areas have got a lot to be thankful for to Nye Bevan, for bringing in an idea from Tredegar Medical Aid to instigate the National Health Service. Well, I was appointed chairman in about 1990, and it used to rotate every year, but I understand that we knew that it was going to close in about 1994, something like that. They asked me to stay on as one role rather than change the signatures and God knows what, which I was happy to do. This is where everything started from. We hired a room that was in this particular building, and then everything started from here.
At the end of 2012, number 10 The Circle, the birthplace of the NHS, after being empty for 2 years, has been reinvented as a community film studio. With the help of volunteers, the building is now a working studio, inviting local communities to make films. Number 10 is part of a unique and unusual architectural treasure for the valleys. Dating from the early days of Tredegar, it has seen all life pass through it. Today, the Circle is a quieter place. The streets are no longer full of workers falling out of pubs. The market stalls are no longer filling the streets, and it is no longer the commercial centre of the town. Now, community organisations operate out of some of the old shops. Buildings are being refurbished. The Circle still could remain as the social heart of the town.